This is a re-recording of the installation lecture and demo because some things have changed over the years and there is a different way of installing a Hadoop distribution on your local machine using Docker or Vagrant and Docker that I want to explain in this lecture. The original lecture is still here. It's the next lecture after this one, but you can skip this one if you can install Hadoop using this new method. So this is the Hadoop installation 2025 update. How do you get started with Hadoop? In the previous version of this demo, I would say that you can download the HDP sandbox from hortonworks.com. Unfortunately, this sandbox is not available anymore. So what do we do now? You can still install a full Hadoop distribution using your own machine, using Vagrant, or using your own machine using Docker. And that is the installation that I will show in the demo here. You can still use the old demo explained in the next video, but you would need access to the HDP repository because the HDP repository is not public anymore. So the difference is that the HDP installation using Vagrant in the next demo needs access to a repository that you only have access to if you have bought the Hortonworks Hadoop distribution. If you don't have access to the HDP repository, you can use Ambari 3 using Docker, which I will explain in this demo. You can also install Hadoop on the cloud, for example, using AWS or Azure, using a manual install or just following the instructions of the Ambari 3 installation. So the Ambari 3 installation you can install on Docker containers on your local machine, or you can just spin up some machines on the cloud and follow the same installation. So to make things easier, I have an Ambari 3 directory in my Hadoop Ops course GitHub repository. And here I have the Docker compose.yaml file that you can use together with scripts that we can use to install the necessary packages on those Docker containers. I also have this README with the steps that you need to execute to set up this container and install the packages using these scripts. So I will go during this lecture over these commands and then we will install a working Hadoop cluster using Ambari 3. So Ambari 3 is again fully open source. The previous Ambari versions were bundled with the Hortonworks platform often, so it's much more difficult to install the older versions. So if you are new, I would recommend using this Ambari 3 version. The Ambari 3 version is quite new, only a few months old, but it will improve over the next months because now there are still some rough edges, but I'm sure it will improve. So let's start with spinning up our Docker containers. So you need to have Docker installed for this. Docker desktop should work fine. And then we have here 4 containers that will be started if we are going to execute Docker compose up. So let's start with that. Git clone this repository if you haven't done yet, and then go into the Ambari 3 directory to execute those commands. So here I'm in the Ambari 3 directory using my terminal on macOS, and I'm going to do docker compose up -d, which is going to start those 4 containers. I get some warnings because I'm on a MacBook that is ARM64, but it will still launch the AMD64 containers because there is currently no ARM64 version of this distribution, so we need the AMD64 architecture. With docker compose ps, we can see whether our containers are up, and we can see here indeed that the big top containers are up and working. So I will go into the scripts directory, and the first step would be to set up our Ambari repository. So if you have a look at this file, This file is mainly going to download our Ambari distribution. We are downloading here 3.00 and 3.3.0. When new versions come out, we can just change this version here or add an extra line to download more versions, and then in the Ambari web interface, once we start installation, we can then pick our distribution. This will also install Nginx to then serve these files using a web server. We'll start Nginx and we'll add this Ambari repository to our yum repository. So we can just execute this file using the setup Ambari repo.sh file, which will copy this file into our first container and then execute using bin bash this script. So let's do that. And this should work automatically. And we have some arguments, some parameters that we use to make sure that if there is a file that is not modified on the server, we are not downloading it again, because it can take quite some time to download all these files. These are quite some big files, these RPM, these packages. So I've already downloaded them earlier, and what it will then do is just check whether I have downloaded them already. If so, then it will not download them again. So these files are downloaded in the directory Ambari repo. And this Ambari repo is then mounted in our Docker Compose file. So we see that this is mounted in the var repo Ambari, this Ambari repo. So this directory is available in every single container. We also mount the host files. So we are going to update these host files to make sure that we have DNS resolving to the correct IP address. So that will be our next step once this step is done. So we can now see that this step is done. So we now want to make sure that our host name is set up correctly. So this file will copy the get IP address to every single node, make a host file, and make sure that that host file is updated here in our configuration directory. And this configuration directory is then mounted again in every container. So we're going to do setup hostname. That executed successfully. And now we can see our host file has the IP address and the host name, which we will need in the next steps. The next step is to do the setup, which will install all the packages that are needed. For example, the OpenSSH server. It will generate SSH keys. It will start SSH. It will do some configuration. So you can have a look at this file if you want to know what is needed. In the setup, we will also again set a host name. So in case that you need to run setup again, it will also set up the host name. If you would restart the containers for some reason, you also need to run either setup or the setup hostname again, because the IP address might change. Setup.sh. So this might also take some time because all these packages need to be downloaded. After setup, we will then install the Ambari server, the Ambari agents, and then we can go to the Ambari web frontend to start installation. So while this is running, I can show you the other files in scripts. So we have the setup Ambari server, install Ambari server. We have again the script and the sh file. So the script will be copied. So here you can see that the script will get copied. So we can have a look at the server script. And this will install the agent, the server, the MySQL server. It will try to get the MySQL root password. It will start the MySQL service, do the setup for MySQL, and then it will do the driver setup for Ambari so they can connect to MySQL, and it will do the Ambari setup, and it will start Ambari server. We have the same for the agent. So again, an sh file that copies it, and then the script. So the agent script will be executed on every single container. It will set up the Ambari repository and then install the agent and specify the hostname of the Ambari server. We do also do a cleanup to make sure that we don't get any errors during the installation. So once this is done, this setup script, we can run the Ambari server and then the Ambari agent scripts. Once the first container is done, then we can actually execute the Ambari server script already. So I recommend you to wait, but once the first server is done, we could actually already start with the Ambari server install on the first node. So this is now going to install Java and the Ambari server. So now you can see it installing MySQL Server. It will initialize MySQL, start MySQL, execute these SQL commands, and now it's going to start Ambari server. Actually, that was a setup, and then now it's going to start the server. So once the server is up, you can actually reach it from your local machine on port 8080. So this is done. The setup is still running on one of the other nodes, probably node 3 or node 4 by now. So we can keep this running, and I will already go to the Ambari server. So localhost 8080, if you go to localhost 8080, you will then see the Ambari interface if everything went well. Login and password are admin. You can sign in, and then you can create your cluster. So you can launch the install wizard. I'm going to give it the name demo. And here, as I explained earlier, you can pick your distribution. We're going to pick 3.3.0. And then we need to tell Ambari what our repository is. So we are using Red Hat 8 compatible. So we can remove all the other ones. And here we need to put the base URL of our repository, which is in our host file, the bigtop host name 0. So we can just say HTTP and then this host name, and this is actually where our repository files are located. Next, the question is, where are we going to install Hadoop on? So then we need a target host, and these target hosts need to have the Ambari agent running. So we haven't done that yet. We only executed the setup shell file. So we still need to run this Ambari agent setup on all the nodes. So let's do that first. So this was the setup.sh, which is now finished. So then I'm going to run the install Ambari agent.sh. And then this will finish the configuration of the agent on all the nodes. SSH is already installed on all the nodes, so I can go and download the private key from our first node, which is this node, the bigtop hostname 0. So I'm going to do docker compose exec of this machine, the machine name I can find by docker compose ps, bigtop hostname 0. So I'm just going to log into that one. I'm going to start a bash shell, and here I can go to the SSH folder, and here we have this ID RSA file created earlier by one of the scripts that I can then use to connect to the other machines from this hostname 0. So on hostname 0, I want my Ambari to be able to reach all the other containers over SSH. So the other containers are those other containers right here. So I want to reach those using this private key. The setup has been done for that. We just need to copy paste the private key in Ambari so that Ambari can make the connection to these other machines. We just have to wait until the Ambari agent is finished, the script, So this is now installing on hostname 2. So let's copy paste the hostname in the target host, and let's copy paste this private key right here. So the hosts are big top hostname demo local 0, 1, and 2 and 3, because we can also install packages on our 0 host. We have really 4 nodes that we can install packages on. We can register and confirm once the agent installation is finished. So this looks like it's almost finished. And we actually have some errors on the last machine. And I've seen this before. It's sometimes you might get rate limited or something, and you just have to wait a little bit and then execute the shell script again, and then it will just try to install everything. So the second time, every time you execute one of the shell scripts a second time, it will go quicker because all the packages are already installed. So all the shell scripts have been written in a way that you can always execute them again in case that you get an error, a network error or something else, that you can repeat the command and execute it again. So now indeed we don't get the error, and it is able to then download these packages and install them. Starting Ambari agent and then cleaning up, and then you can now see that we don't have any errors. We can now continue with register and confirm. And it will then contact over SSH all these nodes and see if it can then do the registration of these nodes. Registration was successful for all the nodes, and it also passed the checks. So now we can go next. We can now choose all the services to install, and I have limited memory available on my Docker nodes, so I'm not going to install all these packages at once. You can always install them later on, so I'm going to install only the basics, which is Yarn, MapReduce, Zookeeper, and Ambari Metrics. There's still a package that is going to fail if you're not going to install HBase, because there are some metrics that use HBase. The time series uses HBase. So that's not going to work, but we will be able to connect to our Hadoop cluster, use HDFS, which is the most important to get started. Then once our cluster is installed, then we can always add more services. We just kind of want to first have a cluster installed with the minimum services. If that works, then we can always add more later. Apache Ranger is a good security product, but indeed we get this warning now that we are not going to have Kerberos, so that means we will not really have security enabled in our cluster, which is fine for demo purposes, but in a production cluster, it's something that you will want. If you're not using Docker, but you're installing this on EC2 instances, for example, and you have enough memory available, then you can install all these packages at once. Just make sure if you're installing it locally, if you go to your settings, that in your settings of Docker, you can choose how much resources you're allocating. So I have a memory limit of 16 gigabytes. If you put this too low, then Ambari will crash and you will have to maybe restart your containers, do the setup hostname again, and restart Ambari server. If you have enough resources, that shouldn't happen, but I'm not even sure if 16 gigabytes of memory is enough to make sure that Ambari has enough memory to install all these packages at once, because they will be installed in parallel on all these nodes. Don't worry if your Ambari server fails, you will just get an error, but you can just restart Ambari and then it will continue the setup. So we're going to click next. And we can say that we're going to install the data node on 3 nodes. the node manager on 3 nodes, and a client on maybe all nodes. The router doesn't install, but we also don't really need it for now. So I'm just gonna remove this. In later versions of Ambari or of the stack that you're going to install, this might work, but right now it doesn't work to install the router. So this is the node, the name node router. So not really necessary for demo purposes. Admin, or Grafana admin. And then here we can make changes if we need to, but I'm just going to use the defaults. Same for the accounts, default should be fine. So we're just gonna press next, and then we can deploy this stack on our containers. So this might take some time depending on your type of your machine that you have. And you will see that this timeline service v2, when this service starts, it's actually going to fail because we don't have HBase installed, but we can ignore that for now. The other services should be able to start. If Ambari stops at this point, then what you can do is you can go back here to one of your terminals and you can do docker compose, and you can docker compose execute into the first node, start bin bash, and here you could do ambari-server restart if Ambari would not be responsive anymore. Our Ambari is still responsive, we didn't get a warning yet, so we can just wait until the installation finishes. Our installation is complete, but we got an error, failures encountered. We have an error here. Hadoop HDFS data node component did not advertise a version. This may indicate a problem with component packaging. So we can retry to see if retrying the installation would work. Because some of these errors are actually retryable, but it will not retry it by default. And it looks that it passed now the data node install, so I think we are good. Sometimes it's also, if you don't have enough resources, then processes get killed because we are doing an install in parallel on those 4 nodes. So we might not have enough resources to do this all at the same time, but then when you hit retry, then the other nodes are already ready. So you are using less resources when retrying, so then it might actually work. So now we are starting the data nodes and the name node. So we're quite far at the end now. Just have to wait a few more minutes. Our installation is complete. We still have a few warnings. And that's going to be the starting of a service, which we can always retry afterward. And then this timeline service, but that was to be expected because we don't have HBase installed. As long as we don't have any failures, we can go click next and then click complete, and then we will see our Ambari dashboard. If we need to start some of the services again, we can do that here, start all. But I think our HDFS is already healthy, so we can go and test whether our Hadoop cluster, our HDFS, is actually working. It's possible that everything is still a bit slow because services are starting and finalizing their configuration. Let's have a look. If we enter our first node, can we access HDFS using Hadoop FS -ls? And we don't have a home directory, so this error is actually normal to get. But if we do ls of /, we can see that we can reach our HDFS file system. So we have a running Hadoop cluster. We have Ambari running. So now we can start using this cluster, and the moment that we need to add more services like Kafka, we can just go to Ambari and add these services as we go. So if you complete this Ambari setup using Ambari 3, you don't need to check the next installation lecture anymore. So you can just ignore the next demo of setting up Ambari using the Hortonworks stack. You can just follow now the lectures using this Hadoop cluster. There are still some rough edges, like I said in the beginning. There are some alerts still here, and you might have to restart or start some of these services again before Ambari shows the service is healthy. In Ambari metrics, we will not be able to get it healthy until we have HBase installed. So that's it. If you have any questions or any troubles installing this Ambari version 3 and your Hadoop cluster, then use a Q&A or reach out to me directly using messages. Tell me where you are stuck and we'll try to help you out.